We are entrusting the day and the endeavor to the Lord. Let's go. Welcome to my channel where I visit many good books but live in the Bible. My name is Sarah Christine, and today I would like to talk about The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I first encountered The Things They Carried in middle school, where we were given the first chapter to read for a class. And having now read the rest of the book, I can understand why they did not make us or let us read the rest, because this book is intense.
I'm fixing to teach these kids that, hey, somebody paid the price for their freedom. Have y'all ever heard of the term numb?
Think drowning in a field of sewage, making a necklace out of human tongues, and having gangrene consume your gluteus maximus. My butt! If you're unfamiliar with The Things They Carried, this book is told in a series of vignettes centered around Tim O'Brien's Vietnam War experiences. The tales within range from hyper-realistic to fuzzy and kind of crackling with static, with O'Brien providing, in some instances, a ton of detail, and at other times making the reader, or at least making me, ask, hang on, what the heck just happened? And in that way, The Things They Carried consciously simulates what the Vietnam War was like for the young men who were sent to the front lines, because to have Tim O'Brien tell it, Vietnam really was a hot, emphasis on the hot, mess. And yet, by his own admission, there was something sweet, not just sour, about their experiences, because amidst all the death and bloodshed, the war made life vivid.
You make me feel alive, but something died, I feel.
On page 183, O'Brien reflects, in an odd way though, there were times when I missed the adventure, even the danger of the real war out in the boonies. It's a hard thing to explain to somebody who hasn't felt it, but the presence of death and danger has a way of bringing you fully awake. It makes things vivid. When you're afraid, really afraid, you see things you never saw before. You pay attention to the world. You make close friends. You become part of a tribe, and you share the same blood. You give it together. You take it together. Yeah, O'Brien is not shy about Vietnam's lows and highs, which have since occupied both his mind and his writing life. But in The Things They Carried, he's not just telling stories about what he and his fellow soldiers bore before, during, and after the war. He's making an argument about the nature of truth-telling itself, asking whether the truthfulness of a war story ought to be measured by figures and facts, or by how much the story accurately conveys the storyteller's experiences. In electing to write a work of personally informed fiction, Tim O'Brien makes it pretty clear that at the very least, facts and figures can't provide the full picture. And I think it can be said that The Things They Carried was written with the conviction that stories are the closest we can come to another's experiences, because while we may not be able to walk in Tim O'Brien's or the other men of Alpha Company's bootsteps, through stories like this, we can at least somewhat inhabit their helmets. Overall, I really recommend The Things They Carried, but after chapter 1, I would not read it personally at night, in bed, or where there are flying insects, because that makes things just a little bit too 4D for me.
They're nuzzling my flesh with their noses!
Read it indoors, upright, with bright lights, and you will be golden. And now I want to chat a little bit more in depth about two questions that I felt prompted to ask through reading Tim O'Brien's seminal Vietnam War text. And they are, 1, what do we need to carry to get through? And 2, what is truth? First up, what do we need to carry to get through? Now, the title of this book is The Things They Carried, so no surprise we get detailed descriptions of what the men of Alpha Company were carrying into the jungle pretty early on. This is page 2. The things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities, or near necessities, were P38 can openers, pocket knives, heat tabs, wristwatches, dog tags, mosquito repellent, chewing gum, candy, cigarettes, salt tablets, packets of Kool-Aid, lighters, matches, sewing kits, military payment certificates, sea rations, and 2 or 3 canteens of water. Together, these items weighed between 12 and 18 pounds, depending upon a man's habits or rate of metabolism. Henry Dobbins, who was a big man, carried extra rations. He was especially fond of canned peaches in heavy syrup over pound cake. Dave Jensen, who practiced field hygiene, carried a toothbrush, dental floss, and several hotel-sized bars of soap he'd stolen on R&R in Sydney, Australia. Ted Lavender, who was scared, carried tranquilizers until he was shot in the head outside the village of Thonkay in mid-April. By necessity, and because it was standard operating procedure, they all carried steel helmets that weighed 5 pounds, including the liner and camouflage cover. They carried the standard fatigue jackets and trousers. Very few carried underwear. On their feet, they carried jungle boots, 2.1 pounds, and Dave Jensen carried 3 pairs of socks and a can of Dr. Scholl's foot powder as a precaution against trench foot. Until he was shot, Ted Lavender carried 6 or 7 ounces of premium dope, which for him was a necessity. Mitchell Sanders, the RTO, carried condoms. Norman Bowker carried a diary. Rhett Kiley carried comic books. Kiowa, a devout Baptist, carried an illustrated New Testament that had been presented to him by his father, who taught Sunday school in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. As a hedge against bad times, however, Kiowa also carried his grandmother's distrust of the white man, his grandfather's old hunting hatchet. Necessity dictated. Because the land was mined and booby-trapped, it was standard operating procedure for each man to carry a steel-centered, nylon-covered flak jacket, which weighed 6.7 pounds, but which on hot days seemed much heavier. Because you could die so quickly, each man carried at least one large compress bandage, usually in the helmet band for easy access. Because the nights were cold, and because the monsoons were wet, each carried a green plastic poncho that could be used as a raincoat or ground sheet or makeshift tent. With its quilted liner, the poncho weighed almost 2 pounds, but it was worth every ounce. In April, for instance, when Ted Lavender was shot, they used his poncho to wrap him up, then to carry him across the paddy, then to lift him into the chopper that took him away. That passage is one of the most memorable and powerful in the whole novel. Just 2 pages in, and in less than 2 pages, Tim O'Brien manages to provide a sketch of each man, convey their unenviable circumstances, and establish that the stakes for them are life and death. But what I particularly appreciated about this passage was the way it illustrates certain transcendent truths about what every person, not just every soldier, needs to carry to get through. The first transcendent truth being that there is necessary cargo. If we revisit the opening bit, Tim O'Brien writes, the things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities were mosquito repellent, water, can openers, rations, matches, etc. And as I was reading that list of what all the men of Alpha Company carried as essentials, like this is not even their discretionary cargo, like comic books or canned peaches, I could not help but think of what Martha was told by Jesus. In Luke 10:41-42, Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few are needful. Indeed, only one. Because Jesus agrees with the men of Alpha Company, a category of necessity does exist, but where Tim O'Brien and his fellow soldiers deemed many things necessary for survival, Jesus is like, nah fam, only one thing is needful. And it's me. In John 3:36, we are told, whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. If you believe in Jesus, you will survive.
I will survive. You will survive.
That said, believing in Jesus is more than just lip service, as clarified helpfully by the rest of John 3:36, which says, whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him. Wrath is bad, so it's good to ask what obedience to Jesus entails. And providentially, it jives with Tim O'Brien's text because obedience to Jesus can be described in terms of 3 things that he commanded us to carry throughout our lives. The first thing we are commanded to carry is our cross. In Luke 9:23, Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Now, carrying a cross is no easy feat. The horizontal crossbeam called the patibulum alone, which would have been strapped to the condemned person's back, weighed upwards of 70 pounds, which for context is more than double what the men of Alpha Company were carrying as essentials, even including their flak jackets, their helmets, jungle boots, ponchos. All of that added up to roughly 34 pounds. So less than half of what was being strapped to Jesus's back. That said, the literal weight of carrying one's cross is as nothing in comparison to the command's greater significance. Like, I can guarantee that even this man I saw at the gym last month who casually picked up a 60-pound barbell and threw it over his shoulder before hitting the Stairmaster as if he was carrying an umbrella.
But we saw that man pick up that 60-pound thing, as one does.
Would struggle to obey Jesus's true command. Because carrying our cross means nothing less than total self-abnegation, total self-sacrifice, and donation. Like Philippians 2:3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value others more than yourself. Yeah, the true weight of the cross is dying to self, which is a weighty command and a hard sell. But you know what is worse? Hell. And to be clear, Jesus does not command us to daily carry our crosses by ourselves. He is 100% willing to help out. Colossians 1:11 tells us that he will strengthen us with all power according to his glorious might for all endurance and patience and with great joy. So yes, carrying our crosses is a heavy load, but in Jesus, we don't have to bear it alone. Now on to the second thing we are commanded to carry, indeed to take to all the ends of the earth, the gospel, the good news that Jesus Christ came, died, and rose again to save sinners. In Mark 16:15, Jesus told his disciples, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." That is not a suggestion. That is a command. And listen, I know it can be awkward to tell people that 2,000 years ago, the God of all creation took on flesh by being born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, even told people to pay their taxes, was crucified for all our sins, ranging from cold-blooded murder to losing our temper in traffic, was buried, rose again, ascended into heaven, and is coming back to earth sooner rather than later to reign forever and ever. But we gotta do it.
Talk! I know you can.
And yes, some people may look at us like we are absolutely nuts, but if that happens, we just borrow a line from brother in Christ and Medal of Honor recipient Desmond Doss.
Sir, I'm not a crazy person.
And regardless of how we're received, carrying the good news of Jesus Christ is a good and beautiful thing to do. Like Isaiah 52:7 tells us, how beautiful are the feet of those who come bearing good news. So yeah, the gospel is thing we've got to carry, number 2. And now for thing that we need to carry, number 3, our fellow human beings. Returning to the things they carried, the conclusion of the passage I first read provides an illustration of this. Page 3. In April, for instance, when Ted Lavender was shot, they used his poncho to wrap him up, then to carry him across the paddy, then to lift him into the chopper that took him away. Lord willing, it will not often be the case that we have to carry our friends' literal bodies so that they can be taken away, but the Bible does say that evil, death, decay are features of the fallen world we are currently in, and as such, we need to bear one another's inevitable burdens. In Galatians 6:1-2, we are told, "Brothers and sisters, if any of you are overcome by any evil, be that the world, the flesh, or the devil, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with gentleness, keeping watch over yourselves so that you also will not be tempted, and carry one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Fulfilling the law of Christ is how we survive. Like Proverbs 7:2 says, "Keep my commands and live." So in summary, if we want to get through the pearly gates as opposed to being dead on arrival, we need to first receive and believe in life's one necessity, Jesus Christ, and then carry 3 things: our cross, the gospel, and other people. And so while there is yet time, it behooves us to ask, am I carrying the things I ought to be carrying if I hope to get through? And, well, are you? Now for the second question that the things they carried raised. What is truth? There are several instances in the things they carried where truth is at issue, with the central tension being between the cold, hard facts of what happened to the men and the hot and humid sensations of the combat they experienced. Within the book, one of the men of Alpha Company, Rat Kiley, acts as a kind of case study for what Tim O'Brien is getting at. This is page 85. Among the men in Alpha Company, Rat had a reputation for exaggeration and overstatement, a compulsion to rev up the facts, and for most of us it was normal procedure to discount 60 or 70% of anything he had to say. If Rat told you, for example, that he'd slept with 4 girls one night, you could figure it was about a girl and a half. It wasn't a question of deceit, just the opposite. He wanted to heat up the truth, to make it burn so hot that you would feel exactly what he felt. For Rat Kiley, I think facts were formed by sensation, not the other way around. Later on page 171, O'Brien writes, "I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know why story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth." Essentially, happening truth has to do with facts, where story truth has to do with feelings. And in reading the things they carried, I was reminded of something one of my high school instructors would often say, which was, facts don't care about your feelings. Because my suspicion is that for Tim O'Brien and the men of Alpha Company, their response to that would be, well, actually, the facts can't hold my feelings. So the question is asked, what is truth? Is it a matter of facts or is it a matter of feelings? I was straddling for a bit. Let me know in the comments below if you have strong opinions one way or the other. But as I was parsing through, what do I think about that question? My mind went, unsurprisingly, to the Bible, because the question, what is truth, appears verbatim in John 18:38 when Pontius Pilate asks Jesus, what is truth? And then he walks out of the room, to which I'm always like, my dude, truth was standing right in front of you. In John 14:6, Jesus told his disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And here's the thing, if Jesus Christ is truth as he claimed to be, then truth is not just about facts or just about feelings, because Jesus Christ is the great fact, the great I am that I am, per Exodus 3:14. He is the ground of being. And yet, from Genesis to Revelation, he has been full of feeling. Jesus Christ is the fact full of feeling. So truth is both the great I am and love incarnate. And the craziest thing, getting back to how this relates to the things they carried, is that Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, the great fact full of feeling, drew near. Like, he wasn't drafted, he volunteered to enter into our mire and mess in order to deliver us from sin and death. The men of Alpha Company, and from what I understand, most of the soldiers who served in Vietnam, weren't exactly sure what they were sent there to do. That is not the case with Jesus. He knew exactly what he was up to. We are told in Luke 19:10, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. That is us. And yet, instead of turning to him and being saved, we all too often run. We, to use the things they carry to reference, hump with all haste the other way. Granted, that was true even in Jesus's day. Like in Matthew 23:37, Jesus cries out saying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones the ones sent to you, how I long to gather you, like a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing. Yeah, they, like us, were sprinting. But y'all, Jesus is not a grenade. He is love incarnate, who came from heaven to earth, that the debt of our sin would be paid and the power of certain death slain. And all we have to do now is take hold of him by faith. And I pray that if you have not made that choice, you would make it today. And to be frank, to turn away from unconditional love and infinite grace in favor of going your own way in a world that is full of certain death and decay would be to have, as one of the characters in The Things They Carried states, D-cup guts and trainer bra brains. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this was edifying, encouraging, and entertaining, and I hope you will continue to join me as I visit many good books, but live in the Bible. We'll call Paul Puff of this. It's like Puff the magic dragon, live by the sea.